Nigel Farage spent yesterday at CPAC in London telling a half-full room of Conservatives that Britain's incoming Prime Minister is illegitimate, no mandate of any kind, an effort to one of the world's oldest democracies. There must, he said, be an immediate general election. And 20 minutes earlier, in the same speech, on the same stage, he had told the same room how good it had felt to force out the Prime Minister who actually had one. He hadn't noticed he'd done it. The room didn't notice either. So stick around because we're going to play both moments back to back and enjoy them in a way that an audience couldn't. Quick context, if you've been sensibly avoiding the news, Andy Burnham has won the Makerfield by-election in June, Keir Starmer announced his resignation a couple of days later, and Burnham was elected Labour leader yesterday, and he becomes the Prime Minister on Monday. Our seventh in a decade, which is quite embarrassing to be honest, and CPAC, the American Conservative Conference, which has now been brought to the UK thanks to Liz Truss, tells you all you really need to know about the calibre of the operation. Farage headlined, here's the bit he wants you to hear.
He says he wants to have the biggest change of direction in politics in 40 years. Outside of 25,000 voters in Makerfield, he has literally no mandate for this at all in what is supposed to be one of the world's best and oldest and most functioning democracies. And frankly, I think that the British public have had enough of this game of musical chairs that is taking place in Downing Street. The only good and decent and right thing to do, given where we are, with a new Prime Minister coming in, that none of you have had the opportunity to vote for or against, is there must be an immediate general election so the country can decide the future.
And it's the usual suspects. 25,000 voters in Makerfield, no mandate, musical chairs in Downing Street, let the country decide, all the same kind of talking points, yada, yada, yada. And look, there's probably a real conversation to be had about Britain recycling through prime ministers without elections. We've done it quite a few times now since 2016. But on the flip side of that, we don't have a presidential style elections, and so we don't actually elect a prime minister. But if that conversation is to be had, Farage isn't the man to lead it, because here he is a quarter of an hour earlier in the very same speech on how this vacancy came about.
And in the north of England, in areas that Labour has literally dominated since 1918, the Sunderlands, places like that, we literally wiped out the Labour Party. I knew on May the 8th we'd got rid of Keir Starmer, and I felt good about that, I've got to tell you.
He felt good about it. He's telling you himself, Starmer was the man in this story who did have a mandate, a landslide, 2 years ago. Whatever you think of him, Reform then fought 2 by-elections this year as explicit referendums on that Prime Minister. Their Gorton and Denton candidate launched his campaign by announcing, and I quote, "This by-election is a referendum on Keir Starmer." Farage stood on stages up and down the country demanding Starmer go. Starmer went, and now the man who spent a year pulling the injector seat handle would like to know, with a straight face, why the replacement pilot wasn't elected. You broke it, Nigel. You're complaining about the noise the thing makes now you've broken it. Which brings us to the election he has called. Because Farage announced this Clacton by-election to CPAC crowd like a man unveiling a masterpiece.
To be guilty of virtually everything, every single day. So I thought, you know what? I don't see why Sky News should be my judges. I don't see why the Times of London, particularly after they published a picture of the house in which my daughter lives, which I think is utterly disgusting at any level, just about the worst thing I've ever seen. I thought, no, I'm not going to do this. So I've taken a punt, because I like a gamble, resigned my seat, put myself up for election again, and on the 13th of August, the people of Clacton can decide whether they back me or whether they back the establishment, and I think they're going to come down on my side. I hope and pray that they do.
I've taken a punt because I like a gamble. Some punt. He resigned his seat, triggering a by-election on August 13th so the people of Clacton can be his judge, and no major party is standing against him. In fact, this by-election has resulted in the most amount of independent candidates in the history of by-elections, and yet his most credible declared opponent at the time of writing is Count Binface. Let the people decide between me and essentially a man with a bin on his head. He calls the Tories for not fielding a candidate proof of a uniparty stitch-up, which makes some nerve when the practical effect is a referendum on Nigel Farage with one box on the ballot. And notice what's missing. 32 minutes on that stage, judged to be guilty, guilty of virtually everything, he says. Guilty of what is never actually specified. The parliamentary standards investigation that actually hangs over him, the one examining the $5 million donation, does not get a single mention. He's built an entire persecution epic and left out the charge sheet, because the charge sheet is the one part of the story where details don't flatter him.
But if they couldn't beat us by fair means, they would try to beat us by foul means. And by the way, I am big enough and ugly enough, and I've been in this game long enough to take stick, to take abuse, to be criticised. We know that is part of the rough and tumble of being in politics. But the coordinated pile-on, helped, of course, by leaks of confidential banking information from state authorities in this country, the extent of the pile-on, the extent of the untruths that have been written, the way that myself and many of my colleagues have been not criticised, but frankly demonised, dehumanised in the most extraordinary way.
The persecution epic he deserves a moment though, because it's a genuine piece. He's big enough and ugly enough to take criticism, he announces. Half true, to be fair, and then spends the solid 5 minutes cataloguing every unkind thing everyone has ever written about him. He doesn't need to be in politics, you understand. He seeks no rank, no title, no position. This is from a man who first stood for Parliament in 1994 and kept at it, even not being put off by beaten by a dolphin, for 30-odd years until Clacton finally let him in. 8 attempts. That level of not wanting something usually requires a restraining order. Now, my favourite moment of the whole speech, though, was the pettiest. Farage explains that he knew Starmer was a dud because Starmer looked down at his notes 166 times in 9 minutes. Then he reveals Burnham's count from the morning speech, 266, which means the leader of the party topping the national polls has a staffer whose job this week was clicking a counter every time Andy Burnham glanced at a lectern. Opposition research at Reform HQ is a man with a tally clicker and a dream.
And I knew that Starmer was a dud because he looked down at his notes in the course of 9 minutes, as I've said before, like a pigeon in Trafalgar Square. He looked down at his notes 166 times in 9 minutes. And I knew this was not a conviction politician, but somebody being given a script to read out. But it's okay, because now we've got Andy, who in his speech today, albeit a longer one than 9 minutes, how many times did Andy Burnham look down at his notes in that speech this morning? 266. Now, I put it to you that if a political leader is incapable of standing before an audience and stringing a couple of sentences together, they might be doing the job more out of personal ambition than out of conviction and belief in the country.
He did throw out some numbers, so let's do the honest thing he didn't. Welfare spending higher than income tax receipts. The figure is real, 333 billion against 331 billion last year. What he doesn't say that's been true every single year since at least 2013, 2014, right through the era that he cheered. More than half of its state pension, and the OBR expects it to flip back the other way this year. The stats watchdog already rebooked Kemi Badenoch for dressing this up as news. National debt rising faster than anywhere but Botswana. Also a real IMF-derived comparison, measured from 2001 to now, meaning 14 of those 25 years belong to the Conservative governments he name-checks. He even admits the Tories 2.5 times the debt. And credit where credit's due, that bit's accurate. And the boast about winning back the vote for 5 million people, the court case was real, the government did fold, and pay reforms cost. Fair play. But watch the numbers travel. 3.9 million when he filed the claim, 4.6 million when he declared victory, 5 million by the time he reached the CPAC lectern. But the moment that gives the whole speech away arrives when Farage tells the crowd of the council elections that he believes in democracy.
Reform fought a legal action against the government and won back the right to vote for 5 million people. We believe in democracy.
Because a Reform colleague addressed that same conference, Matt Goodwin, the man who ran in Gorton and Denton in February, where they lost to the Greens by 4,402 votes. Here's how he described it.
When I ran for election to Parliament in Manchester with the Reform Party in a seat that has a 30% Muslim vote. Now, we defeated Labour in Greater Manchester, and I'm very, very proud of that. We finished second. But we watched the Islamo-Green Party use Muslim clan networks to rig and win that by-election. They campaigned in different languages. They downplayed Islamist extremism. They intimidated voters at the polling stations. They mainstreamed anti-Semitism. One independent report found that illegal family voting, which is what happens when a father or a husband tells their family how to vote, took place in 68% of all polling stations.
Yes, believing in some democracy, hey, rigged. Muslim clan networks, the Islamo-Green Party. Also, magnificently, we defeated Labour in Greater Manchester, and I'm very, very proud of that. Finished second. He lost by 4,500 votes and is describing it like a podium finish. Now, that independent report he's leaning on exists. An observer group called Democracy Volunteers, who sent 4 people in to visit 22 of the constituency's 45 polling stations for half an hour or so each. The 68% is 68% of stations they sampled, and the family voting they logged involved 12% of the voters they happened to observe. The same observers reported polling staff were welcoming, and the only people turned away weren't registered to vote. So here's the part that Goodwin somehow forgot on stage. Farage himself reported these allegations to Greater Manchester Police. The police investigated, and they found no evidence, none, of illegal family voting or voter coercion. That file closed months ago. Farage's response to the finding was to call it an establishment whitewash. So Goodwin stood at the CPAC in July, presenting an established fact, an allegation his own party leader escalated to the police, and the police ran it down and found it empty. And so Goodwin's prescription for fixing democracy? Curtailing postal voting and stripping the vote from 2.5 million people. The party had just sued the government over 5 million people's right to vote, would like to remove it from 2.5 million others. The difference between the two groups is left as an exercise for the viewer. So here's Reform's theory of democracy, performed across the CPAC over the past couple of days. When Farage fancies his chances nationally, an election is a democratic emergency that cannot wait a single day. When he calls one in Clacton that no serious opponent will ever contest, that counts as a letting the people decide. And when the one-seat reform threw everything out this year and lost, rigged, obviously. The police just haven't caught up with the verdict. Nigel reached it on day one. A vote he wins is the will of the people. A vote he loses is a crime scene. And that's the offer, the ballot in Clacton, and I'll be covering every twist of it, obviously up until the by-election itself. So subscribe if you want to follow it properly, and if you are in a position to do so, memberships are open if you'd like to support the channel. And as for the count on the night, Just be careful of it. If Farage wins against a field of candidates and a man with a bin on his head will be told the people have spoken. However, if the margin so much as disappoints him, I'd keep an eye on how quickly someone finds a clipboard-carrying observer with concerns. We already know that playbook. They published it from the stage. Oh, and just one more thing. Reform's London mayoral candidate just gave 2 interviews in 48 hours that contradict each other on the same by-election, and the party's official defence of the 5 million is probably now, word for word, well, Nigel says. You can watch all of that in the video that's on screen now. Thanks for watching, don't forget to hit that like button, and I'll see you next time.